Sarah Martinez never imagined that her routine job at the Mountain View shooting range would change her life forever. The 28-year-old former college athlete had been working at the range for 3 years, ever since moving to the small town of Cedar Falls, Montana. Her job was simple enough: clean the shooting stations, replace targets, and help customers with basic equipment needs. She enjoyed the quiet atmosphere and the steady income, even though it wasn't exactly what she had planned to do with her sports management degree. On that particular Tuesday morning in late September, Sarah arrived at work earlier than usual. The autumn air was crisp and golden leaves danced in the gentle breeze as she unlocked the front gate of the facility. The Mountain View Range sat on 50 acres of rolling hills, surrounded by dense pine forests that stretched for miles in every direction. It was the kind of place where city folks came to escape the noise and practice their marksmanship in peace. Sarah had always been comfortable around firearms. Her father, a retired police officer, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. She understood gun safety, respected the power of weapons, and had even competed in college shooting competitions during her sophomore year. Working at the range felt natural to her, and she took pride in maintaining the facility to the highest standards. The range owner, Jim Patterson, had built the business from nothing over 20 years ago. He was a former Marine who believed in providing a safe, professional environment for shooters of all skill levels. The facility included indoor and outdoor ranges, a small pro shop, and classroom space for safety courses. Jim trusted Sarah completely and often left her to manage the place when he traveled to gun shows or visited other ranges. That morning, Sarah began her usual routine of checking each shooting station on the outdoor range. She wheeled her cleaning cart from booth to booth, sweeping up spent brass casings, wiping down surfaces, and replacing worn target holders. The repetitive work gave her time to think about her future plans. She had been considering going back to school for a teaching certificate, but the thought of taking on student loan debt made her hesitant. As she worked, Sarah noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked near the tree line about half a mile away. It wasn't unusual for hunters to park in the area during deer season, but something about the vehicle seemed odd. It had been there for 3 days now, always in the same spot, never moving. She made a mental note to mention it to Jim when he returned from his supply run to the city. The morning passed quietly as Sarah completed her cleaning tasks. By 10 o'clock, she had finished preparing the outdoor range and moved inside to organize the ammunition inventory. The indoor range was climate-controlled and soundproofed, making it popular with serious competitive shooters who wanted to practice year-round. Sarah enjoyed working in the indoor facility because it reminded her of her college competition days. Around 11:30, she heard the familiar sound of vehicles pulling into the gravel parking lot. Through the window, she could see a group of men in military-style clothing unloading equipment from 2 pickup trucks. They moved with precision and purpose, clearly experienced with their gear. Sarah assumed they were either active military or veterans coming for a training session. The range often hosted groups like this, and Jim always made sure they had everything they needed. She walked outside to greet the newcomers and offer assistance. The group consisted of 6 men, all appearing to be in their late 20s to early 40s. They were dressed in tactical clothing and carried professional-grade equipment cases. The apparent leader of the group, a tall man with close-cropped dark hair and intense brown eyes, approached Sarah with a friendly but serious demeanor. "Good morning," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan. We called ahead yesterday about reserving the long-range section for some specialized training." His handshake was firm and confident, and Sarah noticed the calluses on his hands that spoke of extensive weapons handling experience. Sarah checked the reservation book and confirmed their booking. The long-range section was the range's most challenging area, featuring targets placed at distances up to 800 yards. It required special permission to use and was typically reserved for military units, law enforcement agencies, or highly experienced civilian marksmen. Jim had noted in the booking that this was a Navy SEAL team conducting routine training exercises. "Everything looks good," Sarah told them. "The long-range section is all yours for the day. I'll be working on the other sections, so let me know if you need anything." She handed Sullivan a radio so they could communicate if necessary and pointed out the locations of the first aid station and emergency equipment. The SEALs unpacked their gear. Sarah couldn't help but be impressed by their professionalism. They conducted safety briefings, established clear firing lines, and set up their equipment with military precision. Their rifles were obviously custom-built precision instruments, far more sophisticated than the hunting rifles and sporting guns she usually saw at the range. Sullivan's team included a communications specialist, a medic, a demolitions expert, and 2 other operators whose specialties weren't immediately obvious to Sarah. They worked together like a well-oiled machine, each man knowing exactly what his role was and how to execute it efficiently. Their presence added an air of seriousness to the usually relaxed atmosphere of the range. Sarah returned to her work, cleaning the pistol range and restocking the pro shop. The sound of the SEAL's precision rifles echoed across the facility at regular intervals, a deeper, more authoritative sound than the typical firearms used at the range. She found herself glancing in their direction occasionally, fascinated by their professional approach to what many of her customers treated as a casual hobby. During her lunch break, Sarah sat on the front porch of the range office, eating a sandwich and enjoying the peaceful mountain scenery. The black SUV was still parked in the same spot near the tree line, and she decided to mention it to Sullivan when she had a chance. Military personnel were often more observant about potential security issues than civilian range users. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah continued her routine maintenance tasks while the SEAL team conducted their training exercises. She noticed that they were practicing various scenarios, from long-distance precision shooting to rapid target engagement. Their level of skill was obviously far beyond that of recreational shooters, and she found herself learning just by observing their techniques and procedures. The day seemed perfectly normal, just another routine training session with professional military personnel. Sarah had no way of knowing that within a few hours, her quiet life in Cedar Falls would be turned upside down, and she would find herself in a situation that would test every ounce of courage and skill she possessed. The peaceful mountain setting was about to become the backdrop for events that would change her forever. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Sarah was organizing target rolls in the supply shed when she heard Sullivan's voice crackle over the radio. His tone had changed completely from the relaxed professionalism of earlier in the day. Now there was urgency and tension in every word. "Range control, this is Sullivan. We need you to immediately move to the office building and stay away from all windows. This is not a drill." The radio fell silent for a moment before he continued. "We have multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road. Unknown intentions. Do not acknowledge this transmission over the radio." Sarah's heart rate immediately spiked as she processed what she had just heard. The north access road was supposed to be closed to public traffic. It was an old logging route that Jim had blocked off years ago because it was too narrow and dangerous for regular use. Only emergency vehicles and authorized personnel knew about it, and even fewer people knew how to navigate around the barriers. She quickly moved toward the office building, staying low and trying to remain calm. Through the trees, she could hear the distant sound of multiple engines approaching at high speed. These weren't the quiet hums of typical visitor vehicles. These engines had the deep, aggressive rumble of heavy trucks or military-style vehicles being pushed hard across rough terrain. Sarah reached the office and immediately went to the gun safe where Jim kept emergency supplies and communication equipment. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the combination, but her mind remained focused. Her father's police training had rubbed off on her over the years, and she knew that panic would only make a bad situation worse. The emergency radio was tuned to the county sheriff's frequency, but when Sarah tried to call for help, she heard only static. Someone was jamming the communications, which meant this wasn't a random encounter or a case of lost hunters stumbling onto the property. This was planned, organized, and professional. Through the office window, Sarah could see Sullivan's team rapidly changing their positions. They were no longer conducting training exercises. They were setting up defensive positions with the practiced efficiency of operators who had done this many times before, in much more dangerous places. Their relaxed training mindset had instantly transformed into combat readiness. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Sarah could now hear at least 3 separate engines. She estimated they would reach the main facility area within the next 5 minutes. Sullivan had positioned his men to have clear fields of fire across the open areas of the range, but they were obviously outnumbered and hadn't expected to encounter hostile forces during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. Who would attack a shooting range in rural Montana? What could they possibly want? The range didn't keep large amounts of cash on hand, and while there were some valuable firearms in the pro shop, they weren't worth organizing a military-style assault to steal. Then she remembered the black SUV that had been parked near the tree line for 3 days. It hadn't been hunters or casual observers. Someone had been conducting surveillance, watching the range, learning the routines, and waiting for the right moment to act. But why target a Navy SEAL training exercise? Unless that wasn't a coincidence at all. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. This wasn't a random attack on the range. Someone had known about the SEAL team's training schedule and had planned this assault specifically to target them. But how and why? Sullivan had mentioned that this was routine training, but perhaps there was more to their presence in Montana than he had revealed. Sarah grabbed the emergency medical kit from the supply closet and checked to make sure the range's backup generator was ready to activate if needed. She also located the spare ammunition supplies that Jim kept locked away for emergencies. If this situation deteriorated into a prolonged engagement, Sullivan's team might need additional resources. The first vehicles came into view through the tree line at exactly 2:53 p.m. Sarah counted 4 black pickup trucks, each carrying what appeared to be 3 or 4 armed men. They moved in formation, clearly following a predetermined plan. The lead vehicle stopped at the main gate, while the others spread out to surround the facility from different angles. Sullivan's voice came over the radio again, barely above a whisper. Range control, count 16 hostiles with automatic weapons. They're setting up to attack from multiple directions. We're going to try to hold them off, but if this goes bad, you need to be ready to move quickly. Do you copy? Sarah keyed the microphone briefly twice, the signal for understanding without speaking. She knew that radio transmissions could be monitored, and she didn't want to give away any information about her location or capabilities. From her position in the office, Sarah could see men in black tactical gear emerging from the vehicles. They moved with military precision, but something about their equipment and tactics seemed different from Sullivan's team. These weren't uniformed military personnel. They looked more like private military contractors or mercenaries. The lead figure among the attackers raised a megaphone and his voice echoed across the range facility. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, we know you're here. We have no interest in civilian casualties, but we need you and your team to surrender immediately. You have something that belongs to our employer, and we're here to retrieve it. Sarah was shocked by this development. These attackers weren't random criminals or terrorists. They were specifically after Sullivan and his team, and they seemed to believe the SEALs had stolen something. But what could a Navy SEAL team have that would be worth this kind of risk and effort? Sullivan's response came not through words but through action. A single precision rifle shot rang out from the long-range section, and the megaphone exploded in the attacker's hands. The message was clear. The SEALs were not surrendering, and they were ready to fight. The peaceful Montana morning erupted into chaos as automatic gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The attackers had positioned themselves to attack the SEAL team from 3 sides, using the natural cover of the pine forest to conceal their movements. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of Sullivan's precision rifles answering the assault rifle fire from the attackers. Glass shattered in the office building as stray rounds impacted the windows. Sarah dropped to the floor and crawled toward the reinforced storage room, where Jim kept the most valuable equipment. The walls were concrete block construction, which would provide better protection than the main office area's wood frame construction. Over the sound of gunfire, Sarah could hear Sullivan coordinating his team's defense over their tactical radio system. They were professional and calm under fire, but she could tell from the intensity of incoming fire that they were facing a serious threat. The attackers had superior numbers and had achieved tactical surprise. Sarah realized that she might be the only person who could help Sullivan's team survive this assault. The county sheriff's department was at least 20 minutes away, even if she could somehow get a message through the communication jamming. By then, the outcome would already be decided one way or another. She knew the layout of the range facility better than anyone except Jim himself. She understood every hiding spot, every angle of fire, and every potential escape route. More importantly, she knew where Jim kept the emergency weapons cache, including a high-powered rifle that might make the difference between life and death for Sullivan's outnumbered team. The gunfire intensified as Sarah crawled across the office floor toward the emergency weapons locker. Bullets shattered the remaining windows, sending glass fragments cascading across the room like deadly rain. The sound was deafening in the confined space. and she could feel the percussion of high-caliber rounds impacting the building's exterior. Walls, Sarah's military training from her father kicked in as she forced herself to think. Clearly, despite the chaos surrounding her, she knew that panic would get her killed and possibly doom Sullivan's team as well. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could determine whether anyone would survive this assault. The emergency weapons locker was built into the concrete wall of the storage room, hidden behind a false panel that most people would never notice. Jim had installed it after a break-in attempt several years earlier, wanting to ensure that the range would always have defensive capabilities if needed. Sarah had helped him organize the contents just months earlier during a routine inventory check. Inside the locker, she found exactly what she hoped to discover: a Remington 700 precision rifle with a high-quality scope, already zeroed and ready for use. Jim had been a Marine sniper before starting the range, and he maintained this rifle to military specifications. Alongside the rifle were 200 rounds of match-grade ammunition and a tactical bipod. Sarah quickly assembled the rifle and loaded a magazine, with steady hands despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Her college shooting experience had focused on precision marksmanship, and she had always been naturally gifted with long-range shooting. But college competition was vastly different from a life-or-death combat situation. Through the broken office windows, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions in the tree line. The attackers had established 3 main firing positions, creating a triangular crossfire that was putting tremendous pressure on Sullivan's defensive positions. The SEALs were clearly skilled and well-trained, but they were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Sarah used her radio to contact Sullivan, keeping her transmission brief to avoid detection. "Sullivan, this is range control. I have emergency sniper rifle and 200 rounds. Can provide overwatch support from office building. What are your instructions?" The response came back immediately, with Sullivan's voice strained but still professional. "Range control negative. You are civilian personnel. Maintain defensive position and wait for law enforcement backup." A burst of automatic fire punctuated his transmission. "We can handle this situation." But Sarah could tell from the intensity of incoming fire that Sullivan's team was in serious trouble. The attackers were well-equipped and clearly experienced in small unit tactics. They were using covering fire and movement techniques to gradually close the distance to the SEAL positions. Unless something changed quickly, the outcome was predetermined. Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She ignored Sullivan's direct order and moved to a defensive position at the broken office window. The concrete block construction of the building provided excellent protection, and the elevation gave her a commanding view of the entire range facility and surrounding area. Through the rifle scope, Sarah could clearly see the attackers' positions. They were dressed in black tactical gear with no identifying markings, and their equipment was professional grade. These weren't amateur criminals or local troublemakers. They moved with the precision of experienced operators, which made them extremely dangerous. The nearest attacker position was approximately 300 yards from the office building. Well within Sarah's effective range with the precision rifle, she could see 3 men using a fallen log as cover, while they laid down suppressive fire against Sullivan's position. One of them was operating what appeared to be a squad automatic weapon, the source of much of the devastating firepower being directed at the SEALs. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into a stable shooting position. Her father had taught her that marksmanship was 90% mental discipline and 10% physical technique. She needed to block out the chaos around her and focus completely on making accurate shots under pressure. The crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's center mass. Sarah's finger took up slack on the trigger as she calculated wind drift and bullet drop for the 300-yard shot. Time seemed to slow as she prepared to take her first shot in actual combat. This wasn't a paper target or a steel plate. This was a human being who was trying to kill Sullivan and his team. Sarah squeezed the trigger with steady pressure, and the rifle recoiled against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the machine gunner collapse backward, his weapon falling silent. The other 2 attackers at that position immediately began searching for the source of the sniper fire, giving Sullivan's team a brief respite from the heavy automatic weapons fire. "Range control, what the hell are you doing?" Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio, a mixture of anger and admiration in his tone. "I told you to maintain defensive position." "Sorry, Sullivan," Sarah replied as she worked the rifle's bolt and chambered another round. I've got good visibility and a precision rifle. You need the help whether you want it or not." She moved to a different window to avoid return fire at her previous position. The second shot was more challenging. The remaining attackers at the first position had taken better cover and were being more cautious about exposing themselves. Sarah had to wait for nearly 2 minutes before one of them moved far enough from cover to present a clear target. Her second shot was equally accurate, eliminating another threat. The effect on the overall battle was immediate and dramatic. With the machine gun position neutralized, Sullivan's team was able to shift their defensive positions and begin returning more effective fire. The attackers' carefully planned assault was beginning to unravel as they realized they were facing precision sniper fire from an unexpected direction. Sarah could hear the attackers' leader shouting orders over the gunfire, trying to reorganize his men to deal with the new threat. Several of them began moving toward the office building, clearly intending to eliminate the sniper who was disrupting their attack. She had perhaps 2 or 3 minutes before they would be close enough to assault her position directly. "Sullivan, I count at least 6 hostiles moving toward my position," Sarah transmitted. "I can hold them for a few minutes, but I'm going to need support soon." "Understood, range control. Williams and Peterson are moving to assist you. Keep your head down and stay alive. We're not losing anyone today." Sarah felt a surge of confidence knowing that professional help was on the way, but she also understood that the next few minutes would be the most dangerous of her life. The attackers would be desperate to eliminate her before Sullivan's men could reach her position, and they would likely use overwhelming force to ensure success. She moved to the storage room and prepared for a close-quarters fight, knowing that her precision rifle would be less effective if the attackers managed to breach the building. In the emergency locker, she found Jim's backup pistol and several magazines of ammunition. If it came down to a room-by-room fight, she would be ready. Sullivan gathered his team and Sarah in the office building as he revealed what the captured attacker had told him. The wounded man was a former Russian Spetsnaz operator, working for a private military corporation called Crimson Solutions. They had been hired to retrieve a stolen hard drive containing classified information about illegal arms sales to terrorist organizations. 3 days ago, we intercepted intelligence about a major arms trafficking operation, Sullivan explained as he secured sensitive equipment. The operation was being run by corrupt officials in the Defense Department, selling advanced weapons to the highest bidders. We managed to download their entire database before they realized they were compromised. Sarah listened in shock as Sullivan continued. The hard drive contains enough evidence to bring down a network that reaches into the highest levels of government and military leadership. People with billions of dollars at stake and the power to deploy private armies to protect their interests. Williams was monitoring radio frequencies while Peterson and the other team members prepared their equipment for immediate evacuation. "I'm picking up helicopter activity to the north," Williams reported. "Multiple aircraft probably 20 minutes out." Sullivan turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this, but now that you know what's happening, you're in as much danger as we are. These people don't leave witnesses, and they have the resources to track you down anywhere you try to hide." The weight of the situation settled on Sarah like a physical force. Her quiet life in Cedar Falls was over, regardless of how this situation resolved. She had seen too much and knew too much to ever return to her normal routine. The people behind this operation would view her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. "What are our options?" Sarah asked, surprised by the calmness in her own voice. The initial shock and adrenaline were giving way to a focused determination that reminded her of her competitive shooting days. When faced with a challenging target, she had always performed better under pressure. "We need to reach our extraction point 12 miles northeast of here," Sullivan said, studying a topographical map. "There's a clearing where a helicopter can pick us up, but we have to get there before the main assault force arrives. They'll have vehicles, aircraft, and enough firepower to level this entire area." Peterson looked up from his equipment preparation. "The problem is they know exactly where we are and where we're likely to go. They'll have roadblocks on all the main routes and aerial surveillance covering the obvious escape paths. We need to move cross-country through terrain that will slow them down." Sarah studied the map and realized she might have valuable information. "I know this area better than anyone except maybe Jim Patterson. I've hiked every trail and hunting path within 20 miles of here. There's an old mining road that connects to the extraction point, but it's not on any official maps." Sullivan looked at her with renewed interest. How do you know about unmapped roads? He asked, clearly evaluating whether her local knowledge might be the key to their survival. My boyfriend Derek is a park ranger, Sarah explained. We've explored the abandoned mining areas extensively. There are dozens of old roads and trails from the 1940s mining operations that aren't maintained anymore. Most people don't even know they exist. Williams finished his radio monitoring and looked up with concern. I'm intercepting military communications on encrypted frequencies. They're coordinating a search pattern that will cover every major route out of this area. Whatever we're going to do, we need to move now. Sullivan made the decision quickly. We go with Sarah's route. She knows the terrain, and local knowledge might be our only advantage. He turned to Sarah directly. I'm not going to lie to you about the risks. If they catch us, they'll kill all of us without hesitation. Are you sure you want to do this? Sarah thought about her options. She could try to hide and hope that law enforcement would eventually arrive to rescue her, but the attackers had already demonstrated their ability to jam communications and conduct sophisticated operations. She could try to escape on her own, but she had no training in evasion techniques and would likely be captured within hours. I'm in, Sarah said firmly, but I want to understand something first. Why did you come to this specific range for training? This can't be a coincidence. Sullivan exchanged glances with his team members before responding. Jim Patterson is a former Marine intelligence officer. He's been helping us with off-the-books operations for several years. We were supposed to meet with a contact here who had additional information about the arms trafficking network. The black SUV. Sarah realized suddenly, the one that's been parked near the tree line for 3 days. That wasn't surveillance by the bad guys. That was your contact. Exactly. But when we arrived this morning, we found the vehicle empty with signs of a struggle. Our contact had been compromised, which means our enemies knew we were coming here. Sullivan's expression was grim. This whole thing was a trap from the beginning. Peterson finished packing the essential equipment into military-style backpacks. We need to move light and fast. Sarah, do you have any outdoor gear here that you can use? He was clearly thinking about the 12-mile cross-country movement they were about to attempt. Sarah quickly gathered hiking boots, a jacket, and a small backpack from her personal locker. She also retrieved a GPS unit and emergency supplies that Jim kept for range safety purposes. The precision rifle would be too cumbersome for extended hiking, but she kept Jim's backup pistol and several magazines of ammunition. The mining road starts about 2 miles northeast of here, Sarah explained as she studied the map with Sullivan. We'll have to cross open ground for the first mile, which makes us vulnerable to aerial observation. After that, we'll be in heavy forest cover most of the way to the extraction point. Williams reported increasing radioactivity from their pursuers. Multiple vehicle convoys are setting up on Highway 12 and Forest Service Road. 445. They're definitely trying to box us in using the main routes. Sullivan shouldered his pack and checked his weapon one final time. Time to move? Sarah, you take point since you know the route. Williams, your rear security. Everyone else maintain noise discipline and stay alert for aircraft. As they prepared to leave the office building, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 4 highly trained Navy SEALs were depending on her local knowledge to guide them through hostile territory to safety. The magnitude of the trust they were placing in her was both humbling and terrifying. The team moved out through the back exit of the office building, using the natural cover of the pine forest to conceal their movement from potential aerial observation. Sarah led them along a game trail that she had discovered during one of her hiking expeditions with Derek. The path was barely visible, winding through dense undergrowth that would make it difficult for pursuit teams to follow. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they reached the edge of the open area that Sarah had warned them about. The clearing was approximately 800 meters wide, covered with scattered boulders and fallen logs that would provide some concealment, but no real protection from automatic weapons fire. On the far side, the forest resumed with thick enough canopy to hide them from aircraft. Sullivan studied the open ground through binoculars while Williams monitored radio communications. I count 3 helicopters approaching from the northwest, Williams reported quietly. Estimated time to visual contact, 6 minutes. We need to cross now before they arrive, Sullivan decided. Sarah, what's the fastest route across this clearing while maintaining some cover? Sarah pointed out a path that zigzagged between the largest boulders and fallen timber. It would take longer than a direct route, but it would keep them concealed from aerial observation for most of the crossing. "Stay low and move in short rushes," she advised. "If we get caught in the open when those helicopters arrive, we're finished." The team began moving across the clearing in tactical formation, with Sarah leading and each man covering specific sectors of responsibility. The rocky terrain was treacherous, requiring careful foot placement to avoid twisted ankles or noise that might attract attention. Sarah's hiking experience proved invaluable as she guided them along the safest route. Halfway across the clearing, the sound of helicopter rotors became clearly audible. Williams urgently signaled for everyone to take cover as the aircraft approached their area. Sarah pressed herself against a large granite boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible, while watching the sky through gaps in the rock formation. The first helicopter passed directly overhead at low altitude, clearly conducting a visual search of the area. It was a civilian aircraft modified with military equipment, confirming Sullivan's assessment that they were facing a well-funded private military operation, rather than government forces. The pilot was flying a systematic search pattern that would eventually cover every square meter of terrain. "They're not using thermal imaging," Peterson observed quietly. "Otherwise they would have spotted us already. But they'll be back with more sophisticated equipment once they organize their search properly." The team waited until the helicopter sounds faded before resuming their movement across the clearing. Sarah's heart was pounding as she realized how close they had come to being discovered. If the pilot had been using thermal sensors, or if they had been caught in the open, the mission would have ended in disaster. They reached the forest on the far side of the clearing just as the second helicopter approached from a different direction. The thick canopy of pine and fir trees provided excellent concealment from aerial observation, but it also made navigation more challenging. Sarah had to rely on her memory of previous hiking trips to identify the correct route toward the old mining road. "How much farther to the mining road?" Sullivan asked as they paused to check their position using GPS coordinates. "About half a mile through this forest," Sarah replied, studying the terrain ahead. "The road follows an old creek bed, so we'll have water available if we need it. From there, it's roughly 10 miles to the extraction point." Williams reported increasing radio traffic from their pursuers. "They're deploying ground teams at multiple locations. Sounds like they have at least 40 personnel involved in this operation, plus air support. These people are serious about recovering that hard drive." As they moved deeper into the forest, Sarah began to appreciate the professionalism and skill of Sullivan's team. They moved through the difficult terrain with minimal noise, communicated using hand signals when possible, and maintained security awareness despite the stress of being hunted by superior numbers. Their training and experience were obvious in every action they took. The old mining road appeared exactly where Sarah had predicted, though it was barely recognizable as a road anymore. Decades of neglect had allowed vegetation to reclaim most of the pathway, leaving only a narrow trail that was passable on foot, but would be nearly impossible for vehicles to navigate. "Perfect," Sullivan said with satisfaction as he surveyed the route ahead. "This gives us a clear path to the extraction point while staying off any roads they might be monitoring." He checked his watch and calculated their progress. "We should reach the pickup zone with time to spare, assuming we don't run into any more surprises." But as they began following the mining road toward their destination, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks in the muddy sections of the trail, left by all-terrain vehicles within the past few hours. Someone else had been using this supposedly abandoned route, and recently. "Sullivan," she whispered urgently, pointing out the tire tracks. "We're not the only ones who know about this road." Sullivan knelt beside the tire tracks and studied them carefully. His expression grew increasingly serious as he analyzed the patterns in the mud. "These are from military-grade all-terrain vehicles," he concluded. "Recent tracks, probably within the last 6 hours. Someone with significant resources has been scouting this route." Williams moved to a defensive position, while Peterson checked their rear for signs of pursuit. The forest around them was eerily quiet, with none of the normal sounds of wildlife that Sarah was accustomed to hearing in this area. That silence was often a warning sign that human activity had disturbed the natural environment. "Could be hunters," Sarah suggested hopefully, though she knew that hunting season didn't start for another month. "Sometimes people use ATVs to scout for good locations during the off-season." Sullivan shook his head grimly. "These tracks show tactical movement patterns, multiple vehicles traveling in formation, stopping at strategic observation points. This was a reconnaissance mission, not recreational riding. He stood up and shouldered his weapon. They know we're coming this way. The implications were terrifying. If their enemies had already scouted the mining road route, they would likely have positioned ambush teams at critical points along the path. The route that Sarah had thought would be their salvation might actually be leading them directly into a trap. Peterson reported back from his security check. I found more evidence of recent activity about 200 meters back. Someone set up a temporary observation post overlooking our approach route. Professional construction, probably abandoned within the last hour. They're hurting us, Williams realized. They want us to use this route because they can control where we go and where we end up. Classic pursuit tactics. Sullivan gathered his team for a quick tactical conference. We have two options. We can continue along this route knowing it's compromised, or we can try to find an alternate path to the extraction point. Either choice involves significant risks. Sarah studied the topographical map, trying to identify alternatives to the mining road. There's another old trail that connects to the same area, but it's much more difficult. It goes over Rocky Ridge, which is about 1,000 feet higher elevation, and requires some technical climbing. In good weather, it's maybe a 6-hour hike for experienced people. How experienced? Sullivan asked, clearly considering whether his team could handle the more challenging route. Derek and I have done it twice, but we're both experienced hikers and climbers. There are sections where you need ropes and climbing gear to get through safely. Without proper equipment, it would be extremely dangerous. Sarah hesitated before continuing, and with the weather changing like it has been lately, there could be ice on the exposed rock faces. Williams monitored his radio equipment and reported disturbing news. I'm intercepting communications that suggest they have teams positioned at multiple points along this mining road. They're definitely expecting us to come this way. Sullivan weighed their options quickly. We don't have climbing gear for the technical route, and we can't afford to spend 6 hours getting to the extraction point. We'll have to continue on the mining road and deal with whatever they have waiting for us. What if we reverse the situation? Sarah suggested. Instead of walking into their ambush, what if we set up our own ambush first? I know this area well enough to predict where they would position their people. Peterson looked at her with interest. What are you thinking? There's a narrow section about 2 miles ahead where the road goes through a canyon. It's the perfect place for an ambush because there's no way around it. If they have people positioned there, we could approach from above and hit them before they know we're coming. Sullivan considered her proposal. That's assuming we can get above them without being detected, and it means engaging in another firefight instead of avoiding contact. The alternative is walking directly into their kill zone, Sarah pointed out. At least this way, we might have the element of surprise. Williams reported more radio intercepts. Confirmed. They have a blocking position at what they're calling Checkpoint Charlie. Based on the terrain descriptions in their communications, that has to be the canyon area Sarah is talking about. Sullivan made his decision. We'll try Sarah's plan. She knows the terrain, and surprise is about the only advantage we have left. He looked directly at Sarah. But I want you to understand what you're volunteering for. This won't be like the firefight at the range. We'll be attacking prepared positions with unknown numbers of hostiles. Sarah felt a mixture of fear and determination as she realized what she was committing to. 24 hours earlier, her biggest concern had been whether to go back to school for her teaching certificate. Now she was planning military tactics with Navy SEALs in a life-or-death situation that involved international arms trafficking and government corruption. I understand, she replied, but we don't really have any other choice, do we? The team moved off the mining road and began climbing through the forest toward the higher ground that overlooked the canyon. The terrain was steep and difficult, requiring careful movement to avoid creating noise that might alert their enemies. Sarah's hiking experience proved valuable as she identified the safest route through the rocky terrain. After an hour of climbing, they reached a position that provided an excellent view of the canyon below. Through binoculars, Sullivan could see the ambush position clearly. 3 vehicles were hidden among the trees, with at least 8 armed men positioned to cover the road from multiple angles. Professional setup, Peterson observed. They have overlapping fields of fire and good cover. If we had walked into that canyon, we would have been cut to pieces before we could react. Williams set up his radio equipment to monitor the enemy communications, while Sullivan and Peterson planned their attack. Sarah found herself studying the tactical situation. with growing understanding of military principles that she had never considered before. The key is to hit them simultaneously from two directions, Sullivan explained. Peterson and Martinez will attack from the east side while Williams and I attack from the west. Sarah, you'll provide overwatch with the precision rifle from this position. Sarah felt a surge of nervousness as she realized Sullivan was asking her to take on a sniper role in a coordinated military assault. I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility, she said honestly. You've already proven you can shoot under pressure, Sullivan replied. And your knowledge of this terrain makes you invaluable. We need someone in Overwatch who can see the entire battlefield and provide support where it's needed most. Peterson handed her the precision rifle that she had used during the fight at the range. Just do what you did before. Trust your training and your instincts. We'll handle the close quarters work. The attackers reached the office building faster than Sarah had anticipated. She heard boots crunching on gravel outside and the sound of someone testing the front door handle. Through a crack in the storage room door, she could see shadows moving past the broken windows as the assault team positioned themselves for a coordinated breach. Sarah gripped the precision rifle tightly and controlled her breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her hands remained steady. The hundreds of hours she had spent on shooting ranges during college were about to be put to the ultimate test. The front door exploded inward as one of the attackers kicked it open. Two men in black tactical gear rushed through the entrance, sweeping their weapons left and right as they cleared the main office area. Sarah could see them through the partially open storage room door, moving with practiced efficiency as they searched for targets. Office is clear, one of them called out in a professional tone. Target must be in the back rooms. His voice had a slight accent that Sarah couldn't immediately identify, but it definitely wasn't American. These weren't domestic criminals or local troublemakers. They were foreign operators of some kind. Sarah knew she had seconds before they discovered her hiding place. The storage room door was solid wood construction, but it wouldn't stop rifle rounds if they decided to spray bullets through it. She needed to act before they located her position. Moving as silently as possible, Sarah positioned herself behind a stack of ammunition crates that would provide additional cover. She aimed the rifle toward the door and waited for her opportunity. The key was to engage them before they could coordinate their attack and use their superior numbers against her. The door handle turned slowly as one of the attackers prepared to enter the storage room. Sarah could see the muzzle of an assault rifle probing through the gap as the door opened inch by inch. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she prepared to fire the moment she had a clear target. The first attacker stepped into the doorway with his weapon raised, scanning the room for threats. Sarah's shot took him center mass before he could react, and he collapsed backward into the main office. The second attacker immediately opened fire through the doorway, forcing Sarah to take cover behind the ammunition crates as bullets sparked off the concrete walls around her. Contact in the storage room. The surviving attacker shouted into his radio. One shooter with long gun. Need immediate backup. The professional calm in his voice had been replaced by urgency and stress. Sarah's resistance was clearly more than they had expected to encounter. Over the sound of gunfire, Sarah could hear additional footsteps outside the building. The rest of the assault team was converging on her position, and she would soon be completely surrounded. But she also heard something else that gave her hope. The distinctive sound of Sullivan's team returning fire from much closer positions. Range control, this is Williams. We're 50 meters from your building, but there are hostiles between us and your position. Can you hold for another 2 minutes? The voice over the radio belonged to one of Sullivan's team members, and Sarah had never been so happy to hear anything in her life. I can hold, Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She had one attacker pinned down in the main office, but she could hear others moving around the building, probably looking for alternate entry points. The office building had windows on 3 sides, and she couldn't cover all of them simultaneously. A burst of automatic fire shattered the storage room window, showering Sarah with glass fragments. Someone had climbed onto the roof of the adjacent supply shed and was firing down into her position from an elevated angle. The ammunition crates that had been providing cover were now inadequate protection against the new line of attack. Sarah rolled across the floor to a different position as more bullets impacted where she had been hiding moments before. The concrete wall construction was saving her life, but the attackers were being systematic about eliminating her cover options. They were clearly experienced in urban combat techniques. The radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. "All stations, this is Sullivan. Range control is being overrun. Williams and Peterson assault through the front. Johnson and Martinez circle around back and hit them from the rear. Move now." Sarah heard the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades detonating outside the building, followed immediately by intense gunfire from multiple directions. Sullivan's team was launching a coordinated assault to relieve her position, but she still had to survive the next crucial minutes while they fought their way through to her location. The attacker in the main office tried to rush her position during the chaos outside, but Sarah was ready for him. Her fourth shot of the engagement dropped him before he could bring his weapon to bear. The precision rifle was proving devastatingly effective in the close-quarters environment, even though it hadn't been designed for this type of combat. Suddenly, the gunfire from above stopped. Sarah looked up to see one of Sullivan's men rappelling through the broken window from the roof. It was Peterson, a compact man with intense blue eyes and graying temples. He moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times in much more dangerous places. "You okay?" Peterson asked as he took up a defensive position near the window. His weapon was trained on the main office door, ready to engage any additional threats that might appear. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she was anything but fine. Her ears were ringing from the gunfire in the enclosed space. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, and she was beginning to realize the magnitude of what had just happened. She had just engaged in deadly combat with professional military operators and somehow survived. "Outstanding shooting," Peterson said with genuine admiration in his voice. "Sullivan said you were civilian range staff, but you fight like an operator. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" He was checking the bodies of the attackers while maintaining security of the room. "College rifle team," Sarah answered, still trying to process the surreal nature of the conversation. "My father was a police officer. He taught me the basics when I was young." She was amazed at how normal Peterson seemed despite the fact that they were surrounded by the aftermath of a life-or-death gunfight. Williams appeared in the doorway, his weapon lowered but ready. "Building is secure," he reported. "We count 4 hostiles down inside, 2 more outside. Sullivan is interrogating a wounded prisoner to find out what the hell this was all about." Through the broken windows, Sarah could see Sullivan kneeling beside one of the wounded attackers near the vehicles. Even from a distance, she could tell that the conversation was intense. The attacker was speaking rapidly, gesturing with his hands despite his obvious pain from his wounds. Peterson helped Sarah to her feet and guided her toward the main office. "Let's get you out of this room," he said gently. "You've been through enough for one day." But as they reached the doorway, Sullivan's voice came over the radio with an urgency that made everyone freeze. "All stations, this is Sullivan. We have a major problem. According to our prisoner, this was just the advance team. The main assault force is 30 minutes out with heavy weapons and air support. We need to evacuate this position immediately." Sarah felt her stomach drop as the full implications of Sullivan's transmission sank in. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Whatever Sullivan and his team had gotten involved in was much bigger and more dangerous than any of them had realized, and she was now caught in the middle of it, whether she liked it or not. As Sullivan's team prepared to move into their attack positions, Sarah realized that her life had been permanently changed by the events of this day. Whether they survived the next hour or not, she would never again be the same person who had been simply tidying the shooting range that morning. She had discovered capabilities and courage that she hadn't known she possessed, and there would be no going back to her previous quiet existence. The radio crackled with final coordination messages as Sullivan's team moved into position for what would be the decisive engagement of their escape attempt. Sarah positioned herself behind a large granite outcropping that provided both cover and an excellent view of the ambush site below. Through the rifle scope, she could see every detail of the enemy positions. The mercenaries were well disciplined, maintaining security watches while staying concealed from anyone approaching along the mining road. Sullivan's voice came through her earpiece in a whisper. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're in position on the west side. Bravo Team, report status." Peterson's voice followed immediately. "Bravo Team in position on the east side. All targets are visible and identified, waiting for your command." Sarah could see both assault teams positioned on opposite sides of the canyon, invisible to the mercenaries below but clearly visible from her elevated position. The coordination and professionalism of Sullivan's men was impressive, even under these desperate circumstances. Overwatch. Identify your priority targets, Sullivan instructed. We need to know which threats you can eliminate when we initiate the assault. Sarah studied the enemy positions carefully through her scope. I have clear shots on the machine gunner at the north position and the commander near the vehicles. Both targets are approximately 400 meters from my position. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Outstanding. On my signal, take out the machine gunner first, then engage the commander. Alpha and Bravo teams will assault immediately after your first shot. Sullivan's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had coordinated dozens of similar operations. Sarah settled into her shooting position and controlled her breathing. The machine gunner was clearly the most dangerous threat to Sullivan's assault teams. Eliminating him would give the SEALs a significant advantage in the opening moments of the engagement. Her crosshairs found their target as she calculated the 400-meter shot. All teams, this is Alpha Leader. Execute in 3, 2, 1. Execute. Sarah squeezed the trigger and watched through the scope as the machine gunner collapsed. Before she could congratulate herself on the accuracy of the shot, she was already working the bolt and acquiring her second target. The enemy commander was shouting orders and pointing toward the source of the sniper fire when Sarah's second bullet ended his coordination efforts. The canyon erupted in gunfire as Sullivan's assault teams attacked from both sides simultaneously. The mercenaries, caught completely by surprise and suddenly leaderless, struggled to organize an effective defense. Sarah continued to provide precision fire support, picking off targets that threatened the advancing SEALs. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When the shooting stopped, 8 enemy operatives were down and 3 vehicles were disabled. Sullivan's team had executed a textbook small unit assault with 0 casualties on their side. Sarah was amazed at the speed and efficiency with which professional operators could turn a disadvantageous situation into a complete victory. Overwatch. Excellent shooting. Peterson's voice came through the radio. That machine gun would have chewed us up if you hadn't taken him out immediately. Sullivan coordinated the search of the enemy positions, while Williams gathered intelligence from their equipment and documents. Sarah, come down and join us. We need to move quickly before their backup arrives. As Sarah climbed down from her Overwatch position, she tried to process what had just happened. She had participated in a coordinated military assault and had played a crucial role in its success. The college athlete who had been cleaning shooting lanes that morning had somehow become an effective combat sniper in the course of a single day. Williams reported his findings from the enemy equipment. These guys were well-funded and professionally equipped. They have satellite communication systems and real-time intelligence updates from their command center. The operation to recover that hard drive involves a lot more resources than we initially thought. Sullivan studied captured documents while his team prepared to continue toward the extraction point. According to these orders, they have additional teams positioned at every possible escape route within a 50-mile radius. The arms trafficking network has enough influence to deploy what amounts to a private army. What about our extraction? Sarah asked, beginning to worry that their escape helicopter might also be compromised. The extraction team is military, not civilian contractors, Sullivan explained. They're operating under direct orders from Naval Special Warfare Command. These mercenaries won't dare attack a Navy helicopter, even if they know where it's coming from. Peterson checked his watch and calculated their remaining movement time. We have 40 minutes to cover the last 8 miles to the extraction point. The terrain ahead is mostly downhill, so we should be able to make good time. The team collected useful equipment from the captured vehicles and continued along the mining road toward their destination. The successful ambush had eliminated the immediate threat, but Sarah knew that more enemy forces would soon be converging on their location. The radio chatter that Williams was monitoring indicated significant activity throughout the entire area. As they walked, Sullivan explained more about the corruption investigation that had led to this situation. The hard drive contains evidence of arms sales worth over $2 billion. Weapons that were supposed to be destroyed or transferred to allied nations were instead sold to terrorist organizations and criminal cartels. The profits were split between corrupt officials and private military contractors. How high does this corruption go? Sarah asked, trying to understand the full scope of what they had uncovered. High enough that these people can deploy private armies and sophisticated intelligence operations, Sullivan replied grimly. We're talking about corruption that reaches into the Pentagon, major defense contractors, and possibly Congress itself. Williams reported encouraging news from his radio monitoring. I'm picking up communications from our extraction team. They're 15 minutes out from the pickup zone and haven't encountered any interference. The mining road began to descend more steeply as they approached the valley where the extraction would take place. Sarah recognized landmarks from her previous hiking trips and knew they were getting close to their destination. The familiar terrain gave her confidence that they would actually reach safety. There, she pointed ahead to where the road curved around a large hill. The extraction clearing is just around that bend. We're almost there. Sullivan signaled for his team to halt as they approached the final curve. Peterson, take point and scout the landing zone. Williams, monitor for any aircraft activity. Sarah and I will provide overwatch until we confirm the area is secure. As Peterson disappeared around the bend to scout ahead, Sarah reflected on the incredible transformation her life had undergone in less than 12 hours. She had gone from being a small-town range employee to becoming part of a Navy SEAL operation that could expose corruption at the highest levels of government. Peterson's voice came over the radio with the news they had all been hoping to hear. Landing zone is clear. No hostile activity detected. I can hear our extraction helicopter approaching from the northeast. Sullivan smiled for the first time since the crisis had begun. Outstanding. Let's go home. As they rounded the final curve and saw the military helicopter descending toward the clearing, Sarah realized that while this particular adventure was ending, her life would never return to its previous simplicity. The events of this day had revealed capabilities and courage she hadn't known she possessed, and had given her a sense of purpose that her routine job at the range had never provided. Sullivan noticed her thoughtful expression as they waited for the helicopter to land. You did outstanding work today, he told her. Have you ever considered a career change? The Navy could use someone with your skills and local knowledge. Sarah watched the helicopter touch down in the clearing and thought about his question. 24 hours earlier, the idea would have seemed impossible. But after everything she had experienced and accomplished, perhaps it was time to consider possibilities she had never imagined. The quiet life in Cedar Falls had ended forever, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. As they boarded the helicopter and lifted off toward safety, Sarah looked down at the mountain terrain where she had discovered strengths she never knew she had. Whatever came next, she knew she would never again underestimate her own capabilities or settle for a life that didn't challenge her to be everything she could become.